For years, we have been told that eating fat is bad for our heart, that a low-fat diet is the healthiest choice, that olive oil, nuts, and avocados, foods packed with fat, should be limited if we want to live a long, healthy life. But what if that advice was based on incomplete science? What if the longest and most rigorous diet study ever conducted showed exactly the opposite? Welcome to Longevity Lab. I'm Claire.
And I'm Robert. Claire, I have to tell you, I actually remember the low-fat era very well. I was in my 40s. My doctor told me to cut out red meat, switch to skim milk, avoid egg yolks. I bought margarine instead of butter. I thought I was doing everything right for my heart.
And you are not alone, Robert. Millions of people followed that advice. In fact, the low-fat dietary guidelines were officially adopted in the United States in 1977 and soon after spread across the world, and they were based on the best evidence available at the time.
So what changed?
What changed is that we kept doing the research. And as the research accumulated over the next 40 years, a very different picture emerged. The Mediterranean diet, a way of eating that is naturally higher in healthy fats, kept showing up in study after study as one of the most protective dietary patterns for longevity, lower risk of heart disease, lower risk of stroke, lower risk of dementia, lower risk of premature death from all causes.
I remember hearing about the Mediterranean diet and thinking, sure, it sounds nice. Pasta, wine, fresh vegetables. Who would not want to eat like that? But I also assumed it was just one of those trendy diets that comes and goes. What actually makes it different?
That is an excellent question, Robert. And the answer gets to the heart of what this episode is really about. The Mediterranean diet is not a trendy diet. It is the most researched dietary pattern in the history of nutritional science. There are multiple long-term randomized controlled trials, the gold standard of medical research, that have studied its effects. The PREDIMED trial in Spain, for example, followed over 7,000 participants for nearly 5 years, and the results were so striking that the study was actually stopped early because it would have been unethical to keep the control group from switching to the Mediterranean diet.
You are telling me the study was stopped because the results were so good that the researchers felt guilty keeping people on the standard low-fat diet.
That is exactly what happened. In 2013, the PREDIMED was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. The participants who followed a Mediterranean diet, supplemented with extra virgin olive oil or nuts, had a roughly 30% lower risk of major cardiovascular events, heart attacks, strokes, death from cardiovascular causes compared to the group that followed a standard low-fat diet.
30%. That is not a small difference. That is a game changer.
It is, and the effects did not stop at heart health. Subsequent analyses from the same study and from other long-term observational studies like the Nurses' Health Study and the EPIC study, which together have followed hundreds of thousands of people over decades, have linked the Mediterranean diet to lower rates of type 2 diabetes, lower rates of cognitive decline, lower risk of Alzheimer's disease, and lower overall mortality.
Let me slow down here, Claire, because my mind is trying to catch up. I have spent my adult life trying to avoid dietary fat, and now you are telling me that the diet I was following, the low-fat advice, might actually be inferior to a diet that includes olive oil, nuts, fish, and even allows red wine.
That is a fair summary, with one important clarification. The Mediterranean diet is not just about adding fat. It is about a complete shift in how we think about food. The traditional Mediterranean dietary pattern from countries like Greece, Italy, and Spain in the 1960s, before processed foods became widespread, was characterized by a high intake of vegetables, fruits, legumes, whole grains, nuts, seeds, and extra virgin olive oil as the primary source of fat. Moderate intake of fish and seafood. Moderate intake of poultry, eggs, and dairy, particularly yogurt and cheese. Low intake of red meat and sweets, and a small glass of red wine with meals typically.
So the focus was on plants, not on restriction.
Exactly. That is the key insight. The Mediterranean diet is not about what you cut out, it is about what you add in. Most people who try to improve their diet start by thinking about what they have to give up. Stop eating red meat, avoid sugar, cut out saturated fat, and that is a psychologically difficult way to approach eating. The Mediterranean diet flips that around. It asks, what can you add to your plate that will nourish your body and protect your health over the long term?
That genuinely changes how I think about lunch tomorrow. So what do I actually put on my plate? Let us make this practical.
Let us make it very practical. At the center of the Mediterranean diet is the idea that vegetables should form the base of every meal, not just as a side dish, as the main event. For lunch, think of a large salad with leafy greens, romaine, arugula, spinach, topped with tomatoes, cucumbers, bell peppers, red onion, olives, and a generous drizzle of extra virgin olive oil. Add a handful of chickpeas or lentils for protein. Maybe a slice of whole grain bread with a bit of cheese or hummus. That is a Mediterranean meal.
That actually sounds good, and I could eat that every day.
That is the point. It is not a diet you suffer through for 6 weeks. It is a way of eating that is sustainable for decades. And the research shows that consistency matters more than perfection. People who follow a Mediterranean dietary pattern most of the time, even if not perfectly, still show significant health benefits compared to those who rarely eat this way.
I want to get to the specific research, Claire. But before that, I think a lot of our listeners, including myself, have a question. Is this about the specific foods themselves, or is it about the overall pattern? Because I have seen products labeled keto-friendly and gluten-free and paleo-approved. Is the Mediterranean diet just another label?
That is a very important distinction, Robert, and you are right to be skeptical of labels. The Mediterranean diet is not a branded, trademark dietary program. There is no single food company behind it. No one is selling Mediterranean diet shakes or Mediterranean diet bars, at least not in the way that is supported by the research. The health benefits come from the overall pattern of eating, not from any single superfood. You cannot eat a processed white bread sandwich with a side of fries and wash it down with a glass of red wine and call it Mediterranean.
I am glad you said that, because I think some people hear Mediterranean and just think of pizza and pasta.
And that is a common misconception. The Mediterranean diet, as it has been studied, is low in processed foods, low in refined sugars, and low in refined grains, including most commercial pasta. The whole grains in the traditional pattern are things like barley, farro, bulgur, and whole grain bread. The fats come from plants, primarily extra virgin olive oil, which is rich in monounsaturated fatty acids and polyphenols, compounds that have anti-inflammatory and antioxidant effects.
That brings us to the mechanism question. Why does this pattern of eating actually work? What is happening inside the body that makes the Mediterranean diet so protective?
That is one of my favorite parts of this topic because the biology is beautiful. There are multiple mechanisms at play. First, the anti-inflammatory effect. Chronic low-grade inflammation is a driving factor in almost every age-related disease. Heart disease, diabetes, dementia, arthritis, even some cancers. The Mediterranean diet is rich in antioxidants and anti-inflammatory compounds from vegetables, fruits, olive oil, nuts, and fish. These compounds, including polyphenols, flavonoids, and omega-3 fatty acids, reduce inflammatory markers in the blood such as C-reactive protein and interleukin-6.
So the food itself acts like a natural anti-inflammatory medication?
That is a very good way to think about it. But unlike medication, these compounds come with no negative side effects, only synergistic benefits. Second, the Mediterranean diet improves vascular function. The combination of healthy fats and nitrates from leafy green vegetables helps keep blood vessels flexible and healthy. This reduces blood pressure and improves blood flow to the heart and brain.
And the brain, that is where the dementia protection comes in.
Exactly. The Mind Diet study, which is a hybrid of the Mediterranean diet and the DASH diet, found that older adults who followed this dietary pattern closely had a brain age that was approximately 7.5 years younger than those who did not. The combination of high antioxidants, healthy fats, and anti-inflammatory compounds protects the brain against oxidative stress and amyloid plaque buildup, which are hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease.
7.5 years. That is not just living longer. That is living better.
That is the goal of longevity science, Robert. It is not about adding years to life at any cost. It is about adding life to years, maintaining cognitive and physical function so that we can enjoy those extra decades.
Let me ask you something. When you say the Mediterranean diet is the most researched dietary pattern, can you give me some specific numbers? I love numbers.
Of course, the PREDIMED study, which I mentioned earlier, involved 7,447 participants. It was published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2013. The main findings showed a relative risk reduction of 30% for major cardiovascular events. A follow-up analysis from the same study, published in 2018, showed that participants who followed the Mediterranean diet had a 41% lower risk of type 2 diabetes compared to the low-fat control group.
That is staggering.
It is. And then we have the observational studies. The Nurses' Health Study, which has followed over 120,000 nurses since 1976, found that women who closely followed a Mediterranean dietary pattern had a 25% lower risk of heart disease and a 20% lower risk of stroke. The EPIC study, which includes over 500,000 participants across 10 European countries, found that adherence to a Mediterranean diet was associated with a 14% lower risk of early death from all causes.
14% lower risk of death from any cause. So this is not just about heart disease. It is about total longevity.
And that is why this dietary pattern is so remarkable. The consistent finding across dozens of studies involving hundreds of thousands of participants over decades is that the Mediterranean diet is protective against multiple chronic diseases simultaneously.
I want to ask about the fat content, specifically, Claire, because I grew up believing that saturated fat from cheese, from meat, from butter was going to stop my heart. And the Mediterranean diet seems to include cheese, include eggs, include some meat. How does that reconcile?
That is one of the most interesting areas of recent nutritional science. The old paradigm was that dietary fat, especially saturated fat, directly raises blood cholesterol and causes heart disease. That model has been substantially refined. We now understand that the type of fat matters enormously. Saturated fat from whole foods, like yogurt and cheese, does not have the same effect on blood lipids as saturated fat from processed foods like pastries, biscuits, and fried fast food.
So context matters.
Context matters immensely, and the overall dietary pattern matters more than any single nutrient. In the context of a Mediterranean diet, which is rich in fiber, antioxidants, and healthy fats, moderate consumption of cheese and eggs does not appear to increase cardiovascular risk. In fact, some studies show that full-fat dairy is associated with lower risk of heart disease and diabetes compared to low-fat dairy.
I am going to need a moment to digest that. Full-fat dairy is better than low-fat dairy?
That is what the balance of evidence suggests, yes. A 2018 study published in The Lancet followed over 136,000 people from 21 countries. It found that those who consumed 3 servings of full-fat dairy per day had lower rates of cardiovascular disease and premature death compared to those who consumed less than 1 serving.
I wish my doctor from 1998 could hear this. He would be so confused.
And this is where I want to be careful, Robert. The science has evolved. But that does not mean medical professionals were wrong in the past. They were working with the evidence available at the time. The problem is that once dietary advice becomes embedded in public consciousness, it is very difficult to correct. That is why we are having this conversation today.
Okay, so let us shift gears. What is the single most concrete thing I can do starting this week? I do not want to change everything at once, but I want to do one thing that will move me toward this dietary pattern.
The single most impactful change you can make is this. Replace your cooking oil and your salad dressing with extra virgin olive oil. And I mean really use it, generously. The research from the PREDIMED study found that the group with the greatest benefit was actually the one that received extra virgin olive oil, 50 milliliters per day, which is a little under 2 fluid ounces, or about 4 tablespoons.
So I am supposed to be pouring olive oil on everything?
Within reason, yes. Use it for sautéing vegetables. Drizzle it on roasted potatoes. Use it as the base for salad dressings instead of bottled dressings that are typically made with seed oils and added sugar. Use it to finish a bowl of soup or a plate of cooked grains. The polyphenols and extra virgin olive oil are the compounds that drive many of the anti-inflammatory and antioxidant effects. And these compounds are much higher in extra virgin olive oil than in regular olive oil or other vegetable oils.
So not just any olive oil, it has to be extra virgin.
That is an important distinction. Extra virgin olive oil is made from the first cold pressing of the olives. It retains the highest concentration of bioactive compounds, polyphenols, vitamin E, and other antioxidants. Regular olive oil, sometimes called pure olive oil or light olive oil, has been refined and processed, which strips most of those beneficial compounds. So the label matters. Look for extra virgin, and ideally a harvest date or a certification seal.
That is something I can do. I am going to buy a good bottle of extra virgin olive oil this week and start using it on my salads and vegetables. What else?
The next change, if you are ready for it, is to add nuts to your daily routine. A handful of almonds, walnuts, or hazelnuts every day. The PREDIMED study also had a nut group. Participants received 30 grams of mixed nuts per day, which is about a handful. And that group also showed significant cardiovascular protection.
But nuts are high in calories. Will I gain weight?
That is a common concern. And the short answer is that in the research, participants who added nuts to their diet did not gain weight. There are several possible reasons. Nuts are very satiating. They make you feel full. They also have a high thermic effect, meaning your body burns calories digesting them. And some of the calories in nuts are not fully absorbed by the body. They pass through the digestive system without being metabolized. So for most people, eating a handful of nuts daily does not lead to weight gain and may actually support weight maintenance.
I love almonds. I could definitely add a handful of almonds to my afternoon snack.
Excellent. And then the third change, if you want to go further, is to make vegetables the center of your plate. Aim for at least 2 cups of vegetables at lunch and at dinner, and think of meat as a condiment rather than the main event. In the traditional Mediterranean diet, red meat was consumed maybe a few times per month, not per week. Fish and poultry were consumed a few times per week, but vegetables, legumes, and whole grains were eaten daily.
So if I have a stir fry, I would double the vegetables and have the meat.
Exactly. And that is not a sacrifice, it is an opportunity to experiment with new flavors and textures. Roasted vegetables with olive oil and herbs, lentil soup, chickpea salads, stuffed bell peppers with rice and herbs. These are satisfying, delicious meals that happen to be incredibly good for your health.
We have talked a lot about heart health and dementia, but I am also curious about the gut microbiome. I have heard that the Mediterranean diet is good for gut health. Is that true?
Very true, and this is a rapidly growing area of research. The Mediterranean diet is rich in fiber, from vegetables, fruits, legumes, and whole grains. Fiber is the primary food source for the beneficial bacteria that live in our gut. When these bacteria break down fiber, they produce short chain fatty acids, compounds that reduce inflammation, support immune function, and even influence brain health through the gut brain axis.
So you are telling me that the healthy bacteria in my gut are eating the fiber from my salad and vegetables, and they are producing compounds that protect my brain?
That is exactly what is happening. It is a beautiful and intricate system, and it reinforces why the whole diet pattern matters more than any single food. The fiber from the vegetables feeds the gut bacteria. The polyphenols from the olive oil and nuts are metabolized by the gut bacteria into even more beneficial compounds. The omega 3s from the fish reduce inflammation throughout the body, including in the brain. Everything works together.
This is genuinely changing how I look at my dinner plate. I am not just eating food. I am feeding my microbiome and my brain and my heart all at the same time.
That is a wonderful way to think about it. And it is empowering because it means every meal is an opportunity to support your long term health. You do not need to take expensive supplements. You do not need to follow a complicated protocol. You just need to eat real food, vegetables, fruits, legumes, whole grains, nuts, fish, and good quality olive oil.
Okay. I want to end with a question that I think a lot of older listeners are wondering. I am 65 years old. I have been eating a certain way for decades. Is it too late for me to benefit from changing my diet now?
That is an excellent question, Robert. And the research has a very encouraging answer. It is never too late. A 2021 study published in the journal Nutrients examined the effects of switching to a Mediterranean diet in older adults, people in their 60s and 70s. After just 12 weeks, participants showed significant reductions in inflammatory markers and improvements in blood pressure and cholesterol levels.
12 weeks?
12 weeks. And the cognitive data is equally encouraging. A 2020 study from the University of Barcelona found that older adults who followed a Mediterranean diet, supplemented with extra virgin olive oil for just 6 months, showed improvements in memory and executive function compared to a control group.
So the benefits start almost immediately?
Some benefits do. The anti-inflammatory effects can begin within weeks, the vascular improvements can be measured within months, and the long-term protection against dementia and heart disease accumulates over years and decades. So whether you are 35 or 75, the best time to start is today.
Claire, I am convinced I am going to make these changes, and I want to leave our listeners with something concrete. If they remember nothing else from this episode, what is the single most important takeaway?
The most important takeaway is this. Stop thinking about what you need to cut out of your diet. Start thinking about what you can add in. Add a handful of nuts to your afternoon snack. Drizzle extra virgin olive oil on your vegetables. Make a large salad the base of your lunch. Add a serving of beans or lentils to your dinner. These are not restrictions, they are additions. And the research is very clear. People who focus on adding healthy foods rather than eliminating so called bad foods are more likely to sustain healthy eating habits over the long term.
Add, do not restrict. That is my new rule.
That is a great rule. And if you are curious, we will share specific recipes and meal ideas in our community posts and in future episodes.
I want to thank you, Claire, for walking us through this. I have to be honest, I came into this episode thinking I already knew what the Mediterranean diet was, and I was wrong. This is not about pasta and wine. This is about vegetables and olive oil and nuts and fish. It is about adding good things to your plate every single day.
That is exactly right. And it is one of the most evidence based, sustainable, and enjoyable ways to support your long term health.
Before we go, I want to remind our listeners to consult with their healthcare provider before making significant dietary changes, especially if you have an existing medical condition or are on medication. The Mediterranean diet is safe and beneficial for most people, but individual needs vary.
Thank you for adding that, Robert. That is an important note. And to our listeners, if you found value in this episode, please share it with a friend or family member who might benefit. And do not forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We are releasing new episodes every day, and we have so much more to explore together.
Thanks for joining us on Longevity Lab. See you next time.
See you next time.